The Galactic Council chamber shimmered with cold, artificial light. Towering figures sat in curved rows, their forms shifting in an array of textures, scales, and synthetic enhancements. They presided over countless species across the galaxy, and today, humanity was the subject of their scrutiny. A Zelvarian delegate, tall and clad in reflective armor, leaned forward, his mandibles clicking in amusement. "And these humans," he said, voice thick with condescension. "They fumble with their own limbs, lack natural weaponry, and require machines to compensate for their evolutionary deficiencies. Clumsy. Fragile." His multifaceted eyes shimmered as laughter rippled through the assembly. The representative of the Vrackle Dominion, a reptilian warlord with a hide like cracked obsidian, let out a guttural snarl that might have passed for laughter. "I witnessed footage of their soldiers," he rumbled. "They drop their weapons, stumble over terrain, and shout at one another rather than using efficient battle pheromones or neural links. Their unpredictability is a weakness." More murmurs of agreement followed, some bemused, others outright dismissive. The Galactic Council had seen no threat in humanity, no reason to view them as equals. General Carter sat among them, silent. He was a man built of years in the field, his face carved by experience rather than arrogance. His sharp eyes didn't waver as the insults fell. He simply listened, absorbed, waited. A slender crystalline being known as High Chancellor Rethis finally raised a delicate, translucent hand. "Then why," Rethis asked, voice a soft chime, "do they persist? Why, despite their evident physical shortcomings, have they not only survived but expanded?" The room quieted. No one had an answer. Carter leaned forward at last, his voice measured. "Because we're underestimated," he said simply. His gaze swept across the assembly, lingering on the Zelvarian delegate, whose mandibles twitched at the challenge. The silence stretched. A chuckle, sharp and metallic, broke the tension. The Zelvarian commander tilted his head. "A bold claim, General. But words are just that, words. The battlefield does not favor the clumsy." Carter smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then test us." A ripple of intrigue passed through the chamber. The Vrackle warlord's tail flicked, considering. The Zelvarian delegate's mandibles tightened, his amusement fading. Carter saw it in their eyes. The moment curiosity outweighed derision. High Chancellor Rethis tapped crystalline fingers against the armrest of the great council seat. "What do you propose?" Carter sat back, arms crossed. "A demonstration. Your best warriors against a human team of our choosing." Another round of murmurs, some intrigued, others outright dismissive. "And what sort of challenge?" the Zelvarian delegate asked, his tone still laced with skepticism. Carter met his gaze, unwavering. "A battlefield scenario. Stealth. Precision. A test of skill, not brute force." Laughter followed, brief but pointed. "Human skill?" The Vrackle warlord sneered. Carter let them have their moment, then spoke again, voice calm. "Yes. And I assume your best soldiers have nothing to fear from something so insignificant." The Zelvarian's mandibles twitched. He would not back down from such an overt challenge, not in front of the entire council. "Fine," he said. "Let your humans attempt this test." Rethis inclined her head. "Very well. The test will take place on neutral ground, under controlled conditions. Victory will go to the force that eliminates their opponents first." Carter nodded, satisfaction flickering beneath his composed exterior. "Then we have an agreement." The selection process had been swift. Earth had no shortage of capable soldiers, but this wasn't a battle for sheer numbers or brute force. It was a test of patience, accuracy, and adaptability. The best snipers humanity had to offer were gathered, each a master of calculated lethality. Captain Elias Ward stood at the head of the assembled unit, his expression unreadable. He was not the most decorated soldier in Earth's ranks, nor the most famous. He was something far more dangerous, unnoticed. He had spent his entire career being exactly where he needed to be, unseen until it was far too late. He studied his team, each of them chosen not only for their skill but for their understanding of terrain, of wind, of the silent rhythms of combat. There was Sergeant Lien Chen, whose breathing control turned bullets into whispers. Specialist Omar Vasquez, who could calculate angles faster than most machines. Corporal Adrian Cole, whose patience was the kind that outlasted entire wars. Ward wasn't one for speeches, but he looked them over now, assessing, measuring. "You know what they think of us," he said finally. "They think we're sloppy, loud, incapable of discipline." Chen smirked slightly. "Then let's be quiet about proving them wrong." The others chuckled, but their eyes remained sharp. They understood. This was not about politics or reputation. This was about setting the record straight. Rithos 7 was a desolate world, chosen specifically for its hostile terrain. Jagged cliffs, shifting dust storms, visibility reduced to nothing but silhouettes and instinct. It was the kind of battlefield where technology could become a crutch, and the team who relied solely on their sensors would be at a disadvantage. The aliens arrived in force, a mix of Zelvarian and Vrackle elite. Enhanced eyesight, multi-limb dexterity, even integrated targeting systems. Biological machines built for war. Their leader, a Zelvarian officer named Commander Threx, exuded confidence as he surveyed the terrain. Humans were already gone from sight. Threx clicked his mandibles in amusement. Hiding will not save them. His second-in-command, a Vrackle named Jorik, let out a low growl. "Then let's flush them out." The alien forces deployed, sensors sweeping the environment. They moved like predators, precise, calculated. In contrast, the human snipers did not move at all. Cole adjusted her position, breath steady. Vasquez had already dialed in every variable before a single shot was fired. Chen counted heartbeats. Ward listened. Silence. Then, the softest disturbance in the dust. Not an enemy's step, but the rhythm of their scanning drones. The pattern. He exhaled. A single shot cracked through the dead air. Commander Threx staggered, mandibles twitching as his sensor array shattered from the impact. The shot had struck not to kill, but to blind, his entire targeting system gone in an instant. A second shot followed, Vasquez's mark. One of the alien scouts collapsed, lifeless before he hit the ground. Panic flickered across the enemy ranks. "They see us," Jorik snarled. "But how? We haven't detected." Another body dropped. The aliens scattered, scrambling for cover. The humans had never been detected, had never given them so much as a breath of warning. Ward adjusted his rifle, scanning, waiting. The enemy had lost their composure. Now they would make mistakes. Another squeeze of the trigger. Another silent kill. From the safety of their observation platform, the Galactic Council watched in stunned silence. "Impossible," the Zelvarian delegate whispered. Carter didn't bother to hide his smirk. "Not impossible. Just precise." The battle had only just begun, but one thing was already clear: the humans weren't clumsy at all. A cold wind howled through the jagged ravines of Rithos 7, carrying fine dust that clung to everything. The sky above was a sickly shade of burnt orange, the distant sun barely piercing through the planet's dense atmosphere. It was an unforgiving place, where visibility shifted in unpredictable waves, and where stillness could be more deceptive than movement. The perfect battleground for those who understood patience. The perfect graveyard for those who did not. Jorik crouched low against the uneven rock, his Vrackle muscles coiled with tension. His tongue flicked out, tasting the air, but it gave him nothing. No scent of fear, no trace of the prey that should have been scurrying like wounded animals after that first strike. He had expected panic. Instead, there was silence. The Zelvarian commander Threx pressed 2 fingers to his damaged visor, his mandibles twitching with irritation. His targeting array was ruined, and his vision, though superior to a human's, lacked the precise thermal overlay he had relied on. "They shot to cripple, not to kill," he muttered. Jorik's tail lashed once in agitation. "Then they're playing with us." Threx gestured sharply to his remaining forces. The Zelvarian and Vrackle warriors adjusted their formation, spreading out to cover more ground. Their suits shimmered briefly as adaptive camouflage activated, bending light around their forms to make them nearly invisible. "They cannot outmatch us," Threx said, voice cold. Their mistake was choosing a hunt against creatures built to hunt. Jorek let out a low growl of approval before motioning his troops forward. They advanced slowly, methodically. The terrain was unforgiving, but they were apex predators, designed for war, modified for precision. Their scanning equipment flickered, sending out pulses of data, mapping every crevice and shadow. They tracked shifts in the dust, the faintest temperature fluctuations, the subtlest shifts in air currents. Nothing. Minutes passed. Nothing. Jorek's claws flexed. "They are here," he rumbled. Threx remained still, listening. His mind worked through the possibilities. If they weren't running, if they weren't hiding out of fear, then what were they doing? Waiting. Realization struck just as the first shot echoed through the canyon. One of the Vrackle warriors jerked mid-step, his body going rigid before collapsing. The shot had pierced his armor at the base of his neck, an impossible angle, the kind that only came from a calculation done long before he ever stepped into its path. Jorek cursed, but before he could react, another shot rang out. A second soldier fell. Then another. They weren't being hunted. They were being dismantled. Jorek dropped low, his enhanced vision scanning wildly. The humans had to be somewhere. But the terrain itself seemed to betray him, shifting with the wind, offering no solid target. Threx exhaled, mandibles clicking as he narrowed his focus. "The moment we fire, they know where we are," he murmured. "The moment we move, they predict where we'll be." Jorek bared his fangs. Then we stopped moving. The remaining warriors froze in place, silent, waiting. They would force the humans to act first. A minute passed. Another. Jorek's fingers flexed over the grip of his weapon. He had trained for stillness, but this was different. This wasn't patience. This was drowning in silence. Then something flickered. A sliver of motion. Barely perceptible. Jorek fired. The plasma bolt slammed into rock, sending up a burst of molten debris. Nothing. A diversion. He snarled, but then something even worse happened. His own shot had given them a target. A single breath later, another Vrackle warrior dropped. Jorek's rage boiled over. "Enough," he snarled. He turned to Threx. "We need to flush them out." Threx hesitated. "And how do you propose?" Jorek pressed a switch on his wrist, and a deep tremor rumbled through the ground. A second later, small orbs shot out from the warrior's armor, hovering in the air before detonating. A cascade of explosions rolled through the canyon, sending debris and dust spiraling in every direction. "Let's see how well they shoot when they can't see," Jorek growled. For a moment, silence. Then, a voice crackled through their comms. Ward's voice. That was cute. The shot came before Jorek could react. Something punched into his shoulder, not deep enough to kill, but enough to throw him off balance. The impact sent a sharp, burning pain lancing through his arm. Jorek let out a furious snarl, barely catching himself before he hit the ground. Threx barely moved, eyes fixed ahead. "They have comm access." Another voice, smooth, calculated. "Sergeant Chen." "No. We just listen better than you do." Jorek had had enough. He signaled the remaining warriors and gestured toward the cliffs. If they couldn't see their enemy, they would use higher ground. They scrambled up the jagged rock face with unnatural speed, their armor adjusting to the shifting light. If they could just get an elevated vantage point, they could... A sound. Not a shot. A click. A trap. The cliffside erupted. Controlled charges, perfectly placed, detonated in a cascading sequence, sending tons of rock plummeting. Jorek and the remaining soldiers scrambled, dodging, but there was no time, no space. They were forced to abandon their ascent, leaping down as the rock face collapsed behind them. Threx hit the ground hard, rolling into a crouch. Jorek landed with a snarl, but the moment he regained his footing, something cold pressed against the back of his skull. A rifle. The voice behind him was calm. "Fun, isn't it?" Captain Ward's tone was almost conversational. Jorek's claws tensed. He could whip around, strike, but he already knew what Ward knew: he wouldn't make it. Across the battlefield, the last few remaining alien warriors stood frozen, red dots pinpointed on their heads. Ward exhaled, the sound barely audible over the distant wind. "We're done here." Jorek bared his teeth. "You should kill us." Ward gave a small shrug. "Not my call." His eyes flicked up toward the observation platform, where the Galactic Council had witnessed everything. Silence hung thick in the air. Then, a crackle over the comms. General Carter's voice, steady and composed. "I think we've made our point." Ward lowered his rifle, and in perfect synchronization, so did his team. The battle was over. But the war had just begun. The wind screamed through the canyon, carrying the scent of scorched rock and the metallic tang of plasma residue. The dust from the collapse still hung in the air, thick and choking, casting eerie shadows in the dim orange glow of Ritho's 7 sky. Captain Elias Ward adjusted his rifle, his breathing even, his heartbeat steady. The battle was over. The hunt was not. Jorek stood motionless, every muscle in his massive Vrackle frame locked in tension. The barrel of Ward's rifle was no longer pressed against his skull, but the weight of the moment hadn't lessened. The sniper had chosen not to kill him. That stung more than any wound. Across the battlefield, the last remnants of the alien strike force stood rigid, frozen in the invisible grip of unseen crosshairs. Not one of them moved, and not one dared to reach for a weapon. They were warriors bred for combat, trained to strike with speed and ferocity, but they had been outmatched by ghosts. The humans had not fought them head-on. They had stalked them, dismantled them, forced them into mistakes, and now they stood victorious. From above, the Galactic Council observed in stunned silence. High Chancellor Rethis remained unreadable, her crystalline fingers steepled in front of her face. The Zelvarian delegate, who had mocked humanity so freely before, was now deathly silent. Even the Vrackle warlord, who had laughed at the idea of human precision, watched with unreadable eyes. They had expected dominance. They had expected a demonstration of their superiority. Instead, they had witnessed their best warriors systematically undone. Jorek's throat rumbled with a low growl. "This is not finished." Ward tilted his head slightly, eyes still locked on the alien commander. "I know." Jorek's claws twitched, his nostrils flaring. He was waiting for an opening, for the inevitable moment when the Council intervened and called an end to this farce. But no order came. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then, a crackle over the comms. It was Threx. The Zelvarian commander had taken cover during the collapse, avoiding the worst of the sniper fire. His voice, though strained, carried a cold, calculating edge. "You fight like cowards," he spat. "Hiding, running, shooting from the shadows." Ward didn't rise to the bait. "Funny," he murmured. "I could say the same about your camouflage." Threx snarled but didn't argue the point. He knew, as they all did, that this was not about honor or style. It was about effectiveness. And the humans had been more effective. The silence on the Council's end stretched too long. Ward could feel it shifting, an unspoken ripple in the air. They weren't going to accept this loss. Not yet. Then, Threx spoke again. "You claim human precision is superior?" Ward remained still. "I don't claim anything. You saw it yourself." Threx's mandibles twitched, his wounded pride clawing for a foothold. "Then prove it." Ward's grip on his rifle remained loose, but his senses sharpened. He had expected desperation, a final move to salvage the humiliation the Council's warriors had suffered. But this... "I propose a final shot," Threx continued. "One shot. One chance. No stealth. No hiding. Just precision." Jorek's head turned slightly, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his reptilian features. Whether he agreed with Threx's idea or not, he didn't stop him. Ward exhaled slowly through his nose. "You're asking for a duel?" Threx's mandibles curled into something resembling a smirk. "I am asking for a demonstration. If you refuse, then perhaps your so-called precision is nothing more than luck." Ward let the words settle. He had already won. There was no tactical reason to entertain this. But that wasn't the point, was it? The council needed a moment, a singular image to define what had just happened here. If he walked away now, they would find ways to justify what had happened, to convince themselves this was a fluke. A single, impossible shot would take that excuse away. Ward tapped his comms twice, a silent confirmation to his team. Then, he looked up at the observation platform. Council chooses the target. Redhiss finally spoke, her voice as smooth as glass. Very well. A slight hum, barely audible, filled the air. A drone descended from the platform, its sleek frame gliding effortlessly through the canyon air. It hovered for a moment, then accelerated, weaving between jagged rocks and shifting dust clouds. It climbed, rising higher and higher until it was barely a speck against the rust-colored sky. Ward watched it go, his mind already processing. Distance, wind speed, gravity variation, air density. He didn't need a computer to tell him the difficulty. The council was not interested in fairness. They wanted an impossible shot. Threx's voice carried through the comms. Hit it, and we acknowledge human superiority in precision. Ward knelt, his rifle settling against his shoulder like an extension of his own body. He exhaled, slow and measured, his heartbeat falling into a steady rhythm. The wind whispered past his ears, carrying grains of dust that settled against the metal of his scope. No one spoke. No one moved. The council watched. The surviving warriors stood frozen, their pride hinging on a single moment. Ward's finger rested against the trigger. He waited. The drone was moving fast, shifting erratically, an unpredictable trajectory designed to make it impossible to track. But Ward didn't track it. He didn't chase it. He led it. The moment stretched, elongated into something beyond time. A heartbeat. A breath. A fraction of a second where the universe aligned. Ward fired. The silence that followed was absolute. For a moment, nothing happened. The drone continued its flight, undisturbed. Then, a flicker. A stutter in its movement. A crack. The drone split apart, its sleek frame severed into two perfect halves. The pieces spiraled downward, caught in the planet's weak gravity, before vanishing into the canyon depths below. The comms remained deathly quiet. Then, Redhiss spoke. Confirmed. Ward lowered his rifle. Jorek exhaled, a sound between a growl and reluctant admiration. Threx remained motionless, his mandibles clicking once before he simply turned away. He had issued the challenge. He had received his answer. Above, the Zelvarian delegate slowly rose from his seat, his expression unreadable. Perhaps, he murmured, we underestimated them. Carter's voice carried over the comms. You did. The council's deliberations would take time. There would be discussions, justifications, attempts to spin this into something that maintained their status. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that, across the galaxy, when they spoke of human warfare, they would no longer speak of clumsiness. They would speak of the shot. The council chambers aboard the Galactic core station were eerily silent, an unnatural stillness stretching between the assembled delegates. Even the ever-busy scribes hesitated in their recordings, as if sensing that something irreversible had just transpired. The hollow footage of the duel still flickered across the central projection, playing the shot again and again, a cold mechanical summary of what had taken place on Rithos 7. A single, impossible shot. A shot that had shattered the illusion of human inferiority. Ward stood motionless, arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. His sniper rifle was slung over his back, an unspoken reminder that its purpose had already been proven. Around him, the rest of the Earth sniper team remained composed, their movements controlled, their breathing steady. They were professionals, after all, and professionals didn't celebrate victories until they were sure the fight was over. And this fight wasn't over. High Chancellor Redhiss finally moved, her crystalline fingers tapping lightly against the armrest of her seat. This demonstration has been most illuminating. The Zelvarian delegate's mandibles twitched. His luminous eyes locked onto Ward with something bordering on reluctant respect. It changes nothing, he said at last. A single battle does not rewrite history. General Carter, standing behind Ward, let out a quiet breath. It doesn't have to rewrite history. It just has to correct it. His voice was even calm, but there was no mistaking the steel beneath his words. You all sat in this chamber and called us weak, clumsy, a lesser species in the grand scale of war. He took a step forward, his gaze sweeping over the gathered council. You watched the battle. You saw the hunt. You witnessed the shot. And yet, you still tell yourselves it was a fluke. Jorek, standing apart from the council but still within earshot, let out a low growl. His Vrackle instincts fought against his wounded pride, but even he could not deny what had happened. His warriors had been hunted like prey. His enemies had never needed to charge. They had simply waited, aimed, and ended the fight with mathematical certainty. Carter's voice lowered. You think we fought to prove our superiority? He shook his head. We fought to prove that you were wrong about us. And we did. A slow ripple of tension moved through the room. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably, others stiffened, unwilling to acknowledge the weight of his words. Then Threx spoke, his voice measured but cold. Precision is not the same as dominance. Ward finally turned his head, his voice just as calm. No. But dominance doesn't always belong to the loudest force. He gestured to the footage still hovering in the air. It belongs to the one that doesn't miss. Silence. Then, High Chancellor Redhiss leaned forward, her crystalline features unreadable. Tell me, Captain Ward, do you believe humanity is ready for war? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Carter's lips pressed into a firm line, but he did not answer. This was Ward's moment, his trial, his battlefield. Ward met Redhiss's gaze, his expression unwavering. We never wanted war, he said. We were invited into this council as an afterthought, a lesser species, permitted to exist in the shadow of greater empires. His voice remained even, but there was something sharp beneath it, a quiet, steady defiance. We knew what you all thought of us. You laughed at our methods. You dismissed our strategies. His eyes narrowed slightly. And when we proved you wrong, you moved the goalposts. You want to know if we're ready for war. His fingers flexed against his forearm, but his tone never wavered. We've been ready since the first time someone looked at us and decided we didn't belong. A murmur swept through the chamber, low voices whispering behind folded hands. The Zelvarian delegate exhaled sharply. Then perhaps a true test is in order. Carter's expression darkened. I thought this was the test. Jorek's tail lashed once, his reptilian eyes narrowing. This was an exhibition. A game played in a controlled environment. He took a step forward, his massive form casting a long shadow across the polished floor. A single sniper team against a small detachment proves skill. It does not prove survival. Threx inclined his head slightly. Your human forces fought well against a limited squad of elite hunters. But war is not fought in skirmishes. It is fought in conflicts where numbers are overwhelming, where enemy fleets blacken the stars, where there is no time to plan for a perfect shot. His mandibles twitched. If humanity is to be recognized as a true power, then let them survive what we have survived. Ward exchanged a glance with Carter. Neither of them needed words to understand what was happening. The council was cornered, but it wasn't conceding. It was escalating. Redhiss spoke again, her voice a smooth, dangerous whisper. The Korthian front remains contested. The words sent another ripple through the room. Carter's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what they were suggesting. Ward remained still. You want to send us to the Korthian war zone? Redhiss's crystalline lips curved ever so slightly. If humanity believes itself ready, then let it prove itself in a war that has already begun. The Korthian front was not a battle. It was a meat grinder. A war of attrition that had stretched across systems, consuming fleets, soldiers, entire colonies. No side had gained ground for years. It was where empires bled. And now, the Council wanted to throw humanity into it. Carter exhaled slowly. This isn't a test. His voice was quiet, edged with something colder than anger. This is an execution. Threx's mandibles curled into something resembling a smirk. Then decline. Ward's voice cut through the room like a gunshot. No. Carter turned sharply. Ward. The sniper didn't look away from the council. We don't run from challenges. Red Hiss observed him for a long moment, unreadable. Very well. The vote will be cast. A pause. Then, one by one, the council delegates raised their hands. One by one, humanity's fate was sealed. Carter let out a slow breath. The war wasn't over. For humanity, it was just beginning.